Well, I've represented several of the individuals that homes were raided back on September 24th of 2010 and have been involved in the case since that time. Well, the public statements from the people whose homes were raided state that they believe the case began shortly before the 2008 Republican National Convention. And a woman showed up wanting to become active and involved in anti-war activities. And she ended up joining a couple of the organizations that were subsequently targeted by these raids. And then she mysteriously disappeared immediately after or at the time of the raids. And so they now believe, in their statements, they say they believe she was a law enforcement infiltrator. And they state that, in fact, she's been identified as a law enforcement infiltrator by attorneys for the government. The best that we can tell from what is publicly available is that they're using a statute called Material Support for Terrorism, in short, basically a statute that was created after September 11th of 2001 that very broadly penalizes anybody who engages in what the government terms is support for terrorism. It can be read and has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to extend really up to coordinated advocacy or speaking on behalf of groups. And then I think the second noteworthy part of it is that really it gives the government unfettered discretion to designate a terrorist group. In this case, the government is not focusing on what most Americans traditionally would see as terrorist groups targeting the United States, such as Al-Qaeda, but rather the focus of the investigation appears to be groups involved in a civil war in Colombia, an ongoing civil war where the U.S. has picked sides, as well as Palestinian groups who have been engaged in ongoing conflict with the state of Israel since 1948. Anytime that you are willing to push back and form political and strategic alliances and talk about the broader issues involved, that's something that the government doesn't normally expect, and that's something that can create limits on and restrain the government in its exercise of, in internal security targeted against political opposition to the government.
Over 5 years ago, war criminals, torturers, and kidnappers were preparing to descend on St. Paul. Instead, according to the statements that we've heard here today, our internal security forces, led by the FBI, sent undercover law enforcement officials to the Twin Cities to infiltrate organizations that were in fact seeking to hold those war criminals, torturers, and kidnappers accountable for their crime. But what I state when I say that there were war criminals, torturers, and kidnappers, I think are fair statements of fact. In fact, we say that not just by the facts, but also by the legal theory of command responsibility, which is a legal theory built by the United States after World War II, used in the prosecutions in Nuremberg and of officials in Japan. Over a year ago, the people whose homes were raided sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney saying, "It's now been 2 years since you raided our homes. We already have a picture of the undercover infiltrator that you sent into our hospital rooms and our houses and our political organizations. We know who she was. We know what she looks like. Why don't you send us a copy of the search warrant application and affidavit? We want to see what reasons you gave for kicking down our doors and raiding our homes." And the government didn't respond to that. Well, as of last week, we have now filed a motion to unseal those search warrant affidavits and applications and filed that in the United States District Court here in Minneapolis. The government has indicated that it's likely to oppose that, and we expect a hearing to be set in the near future. We could hold a raffle on how many times the word terror and terrorism will occur